And one of the earmarks of the Soviet industrial model was to have political commissars in every business. And that's essentially what we started to adopt over the last 10 years.
So, Richard, you wrote a piece about big law, and big law has been in the news quite a bit lately. Lay the groundwork here. What is big law, and why has Donald Trump decided that they are an institution that he wants to tangle with?
Well, big law is a reference to the very large law firms that service corporate America and Wall Street. And there's probably 100 really significant law firms. And, this is kind of a moniker that's given to those law firms that really specialize on big business deals, big business litigation. And the law firms have grown to be like the people they've been servicing. And so they're quite large and international in scope and really, I think, represent the elite element of law. And I think to understand what's going on, you have to look at the very first piece you posted this morning, Tom, which talks about how Trump has launched a war in all elements of elite culture. And so I think that what the Trump administration perceives is that the big law firms are kind of part and parcel, almost like the hub of what's been happening in terms of the politicization of business and law generally. And so I think that this is an extraordinary move designed to try to drive politics out of business. And by trying to get out of business, they're going after the law firms that service them.
We ran a post the other day by this guy, Jeff Clark, who it was on X. We ran it on, I think, over the weekend on the front page. And he talked about his experience in big law and how essentially, the left sort of captured all of these elite law schools. And then those folks moved on to sort of capture a lot of these law firms. And he mentioned that, there used to be some semblance of balance. There used to be kind of not necessarily 50-50, but over the past few decades, I guess, that's moved. So it's almost, 80-20, 90-10, leaning to the left. And the left is always championing when they're doing pro bono work. They're championing all the sort of left-wing progressive causes. And that what needs to happen is sort of some semblance of a return to balance, hiring of conservative, from conservative law schools or people who are conservative. Is that essentially how your experience has been in the field of law for the last 4 decades?
Well, I was very fortunate to be at a firm that was very welcoming of different points of view. And I don't know that all law firms had that same culture that ours did. In fact, I played an important role in the management and decisions about what kind of cases we would take on. So, I think you can't really, paint with a broad brush. That said, I think the real target of the Trump administration are the businesses that sort of joined hands with the activists. So it used to be that business was a counterbalance to government. But about 15 years ago, the Business Roundtable and other businesses like BlackRock, they all kind of threw in with the activists and sort of joined hands with them. And so suddenly there was no longer counterbalancing force within the ecosystem in which the big law firms operated. So if all the flow is coming from one direction, if it's all coming from the left, it's natural to go with the flow. And so I think that's what happened. Is what big law did was sort of mirroring what was happening in business more generally when business became more political. And so it became kind of a self-reinforcing phenomena where their lawyers sort of became the amen choir for some of what was going on. And you saw this politicization where, I was a Soviet history major in college, and one of the earmarks of the Soviet industrial model was to have political commissars in every business. And that's essentially what we started to adopt over the last 10 years, where people had these essential politicos brought into the C-suite under the rubric of DEI or ESG, and they became kind of the point of the spear within business for the left and for the Democratic Party. And so big business has become part of the Democratic coalition. And so I think what this is really aimed at is less the law firms, but more at depoliticizing business. And they're going after, an element of that ecosystem, which is going to help drive it back the other direction.
We're speaking with Richard Porter. He's a contributor to RealClearPolitics, has a piece on the site this morning about the very subject that we are discussing. He's a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois. Richard, obviously this was targeted. Paul Weiss is the name of the firm that's been in the news quite a bit. And so give our listeners a sense of what did the Trump administration, ask of them or demand of them? What was, and because I see these stories that, they capitulated to Trump and they've caved and all these things. Help us figure out exactly what was demanded or asked of them, and what did they actually agree to?
Well, I think Trump ultimately demanded for them to be themselves. And I think that's what made this kind of an interesting agreement, because if you look at what the CEO of Paul Weiss agreed to, he was basically agreeing to the principles that guide the business of Paul Weiss in the first instance, to be balanced and to hire from all ranges, a diverse array of legal talent, and to take on matters from all parts of the spectrum. In other words, Paul Weiss was never designed or intended to be one way or the other, as with other big law firms. And instead, what happened was there was this drift. And so basically, as with Columbia, you look at the agreement that the Trump administration concurrently was doing with Columbia University, it was demanding of Columbia that it be a university again, and that it be open to different points of view. And so the Paul Weiss agreement is really, as I say in the piece, it's sleeves off the vest, which is to say they gave nothing other than just acknowledging who they're supposed to be, which is a high quality firm focused on legal talent coming from all directions of every race, color, and philosophical perspective. And so, I think it's a good roadmap for people generally, right? Politics and business don't have to be, working hand in glove. There's, focus on making widgets. It doesn't have to be political.
But, the Paul Weiss case and the Columbia case that you mentioned, right, are being sort of framed in the media as, oh, this is the Trump sort of authoritarian regime that is imposing its anti-free speech. They're not, tolerating diverse viewpoints on campus. They're squelching academic freedom, and they're doing the same. They're strong-arming these law firms into getting what they want. Is there something to that, Richard? Is this appropriate for the administration to be telling, irrespective, if you think Columbia has gone off the rails, is it appropriate for the administration to be, using the levers of money and power to be forcing organizations to do what they want? And does that set a bad precedent when, a Democrat comes in, as they obviously will, that this is going to be now the new normal?
Well, I think you have to recognize that this has been going on, this levering has been going on now for many years. And the levering has all been from the left. And it's with this ecosystem of activist groups, which, by the way, many of which were funded, indirectly or directly by USAID. So you had this government activist, kind of groups working again with some big law in the pro bono space, driving an agenda towards the left. And so there was no real countervailing organizations on the right pushing back against this. And so the Trump administration is serving in that role. It's levering back against the left wing, levering from the other direction. And so, for example, with Columbia, what you see is Columbia basically agreeing that, gosh, yeah, we should protect Jewish students. What they let happen was wildly inappropriate, right? And that they ought to have some balance in their scholarship. That's the whole point with having an open university system. And unfortunately, what we've seen is once the left gets in, they want to exclude all other points of view, and they want to just make this more monolithic. So the reality is that Trump, through these actions in many different directions, is trying to open up the elite culture again, open up elite culture to different perspectives, and to make it safe for people to be conservative and to reject some of the left-wing activism that's been going through and being levered into the businesses and the universities and so forth.